Alright, I want you to listen very closely here while Flea names the greatest bass player in history. And what I want you to listen closely to isn't just who he chooses as the greatest bass player in history, because that might not come as such a surprise. But I want you to listen to his reasoning behind his choice, and then I'm going to comment on that, and then I'm going to ask you what you think. So let's listen to Flea right now talk about who he thinks is the greatest bass player in history. Here he is.
I think Paul's the greatest rock bass player. He's just great. I mean, look, there's so many guys that are great in different ways, but Paul's his bass playing is so lyrical and melodic, and I mean, it's just so beautiful, And I think one of the things is I've heard that he put the bass on after. So as like a band like mine, the bass is often coming, sometimes a lot of start with bass lines. So coming first, or the music comes first. Whereas Paul's I think Paul and John and George and, those guys, they wrote songs, and Paul would do the bass when multi-tracking came in the beginning of them, they just went and played live, but would do it after, Sgt. Pepper's. The melody's already there, so then he's doing a Bach counter melody.
Yeah.
So the bass is like a melody as opposed to just rhythm and like that. And
Okay, so what he's saying there is that he finds Paul McCartney to be the best bass player in history because his bass lines are so melodic and so beautiful. And then he goes on to point out one of the reasons why Paul McCartney's bass lines seem to stand out more than many other bass players, which is that the Beatles chose to record the bass last in the recording process. And when they overdubbed the bass, he was able to use the existing track as a point to create a counter melody against, thereby bringing the bass into a greater contrast. He could also use the bass to complement the vocal line. This is a novel approach. I don't know of any other bands that have tried to use it other than the Beatles. And I definitely think that if you listen to a Beatles song like Something or Come Together, you can see how this approach really bears fruit. Now, whether or not Paul McCartney is in fact the greatest rock bass player in history may be debatable, but what's not debatable is that his bass lines really stand out, that they're very memorable. And the same can be said for Ringo Starr's drumming. Now that is a topic for a separate video, but what I want to say here is that Flea was also very careful to point out that he said rock bass player. He said Paul is the greatest rock bass player. And the reason that he made this point of distinction is because there are so many jazz players and blues players. There are musicians out there that have pushed the bass farther in terms of music theory and what is possible to do with it. And I think that what he's saying here is that Paul McCartney found the most effective role for the bass in popular music, which is slightly different than saying, well, he's the greatest technician on the bass or the greatest theorist on the bass or the greatest visionary. What he's saying is he used the bass most effectively in rock and pop music. Now, my question to you is, do you think this is true? And if so, do you think that the Beatles' approach of recording the bass last in the process contributes to this greatness? And then lastly, why haven't other bands followed suit with this technical approach of doing the bass last? And my final observation here is that in many interviews, Paul McCartney has given credit to Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys for first showing him how to use the bass in a melodic fashion. And I think this is a very interesting point to keep in mind and may be the subject of a future video. This is what I think, but what really matters is what you think. So if you have an idea about this or any other topic connected to classic or contemporary music, please drop it in the section below, and remember to like and subscribe. Also check out the join button that's available now. Choose to become a channel member, you'll gain access to members-only badges, polls, videos, and other cool perks you'll see when you click on the button. You can also help out the channel by clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee link, going to the Buy Me a Coffee site, and leaving a donation. Every little bit helps this channel stay strong. Thanks a lot.